Hey, Kasha, how's it going?
I'm well. How are you today?
Good.
Good deal. Good deal. A little cold and chilly.
Yeah, it's chilly down there in Tennessee, huh?
It is wet, rainy, windy.
Yeah, my sister lives in Murfreesboro, so
Oh
she's not
yeah,
too far from where you are.
exactly. It's about an
Yeah,
hour out.
yeah, she's been complaining about the weather too.
It's a hot mess.
Here in Chicago, the temperature hasn't been bad, but it's the wind. It's like been windy, so that wind chill makes a difference.
A big difference.
Yeah.
So it's the last class. Oh no.
Yeah, it's sad, bittersweet. All right, waiting for everybody to get in. Hey, Chloe, how's it going?
Going well. How are you doing?
I'm good. Kyle, how are you?
Great as always. How about yourself?
Pretty good, hanging in there. How are you, Charles? How's your week going?
Good, good. It's just it's raining a lot here in LA.
Yeah. LA's been having some crazy weather. It's been like the most precipitation in a long time out there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Haneen, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Maya, how's it going?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Chandler, how are you?
I'm good. Still a little sick like last week, but getting better.
Uh, you're improving somewhat, right? Madison, how are you?
I'm okay. I got some really chaotic news over the weekend, but we're figuring it out.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully not anything you can't handle, Let's see, who else we got coming in? Jasmine's coming in. Megan. Jasmine, how's it going?
Oh, it is wonderful today. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I was just talking to Kashe about the weather. I guess Tennessee has had like similar weather to us. I was telling her like the temperature is good, but the wind, this wind just, you think like, oh, it's 55 degrees and it's gonna be nice, and wind chill just like totally throws that out the window. Megan, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm good. All right, so our last class, bittersweet. Wonder what happened to Nicholas. Has everyone had a good time so far in the class? You felt it was beneficial in any way, shape, or form from the topics we covered? All right, that's good to hear. Yeah, we're gonna wrap up with social justice counseling and talk about some frameworks and models and concepts and things of that nature. And maybe watch maybe partially some of the video that was up there for sex trafficking. Has anybody not watched that video yet? Raise your hand if you haven't seen it. Has everyone watched it, I take it? Okay, so we could maybe review it, watch a few minutes of it and kind of review and discuss it. All right, so without further ado, I will put you in a group so we can start off by talking about discussion questions and get the conversations opened up and see what we get. So I'm going to put everybody in the group for about, let's say 15 minutes. So hang back, hang tight, and see what we can come up with, and I'll see you in a few. Go. Questionnaire. Okay, welcome back. All right, Kyle, you're showing up first on my screen. Who was in your group?
It was Charles and myself, and we went over a couple of his questions. We only got on one of mine. I'll throw it out there. It was over the speech that Martin Luther King wrote or gave back in the day. This speech about 55 years old, but King mentions in the somewhere in the middle of the speech, he mentions creation of a program to demolition the slums of, I don't know, whatever inner city he was talking about, and have better housing, quality housing built by the local residents. And I was just, thinking about the psychological effects that could have on, the people who would do that, the local residents. And I was just thinking, could a program like that work today if it was created?
Okay, so in terms of the residents of a community building their own housing within the community, how would that maybe empower them psychologically or change their viewpoints or worldviews or behavior? Okay, so what did you kind of come up with? What were some of your theories or thoughts on that?
Yeah, overall, I think it could work. I mean, it depends on, where it would be and who would be involved. But we were just kind of discussing that it would be difficult no matter what because of the vast, how do I put it? Like just the variance in homelessness, like the reasons why people are homeless and what put them out on the street, mental health, drugs, whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
So, we were thinking, some people would probably jump right on the opportunity, and then you'd have other people who, for whatever reason, just wouldn't jump on it. And it kind of a partial thing, but I don't know. We just kind of figured overall that, we think it would work in general.
Okay, so the idea of having people build their own housing as a way to empower them psychologically, it's a way to give them maybe pride in their own community, knowing that it's built from their own hands, and obviously empowering them economically, right? By giving themselves housing, sort of creating their own mission and vision and livelihood in some sense. What is everyone's else thoughts about that? Anybody has something think that would be advantageous and maybe a social justice framework or context or otherwise?
I don't know if this is on the same level or what have you, but right off the interstate down here off the I-240, it's like a wooded area,
Mhm.
and it's like a whole community of homeless people done gathered together, and they built little small huts and houses. I mean, like 2 and 3 room little houses and stuff. And like they actually done made themselves a little community. And I mean, they don't act like the homeless people, the others does. And they take so much more pride in themselves. You can be
Mhm.
driving down the E-way and you'll see them out there in the rivers taking baths and washing their clothes and stuff.
Mhm.
But you cannot approach them like you would approach a normal homeless person because they'll stand bolder and taller, like they have way more than you have, and they just have so much more pride in themselves. So I can understand where the pride will come from to take care of what you got and what you get if you know build your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there gotta be, yeah, definitely a change in your mindset if you're actively engaging in sort of taking yourself out of bad situations and maybe alongside people who may be in the same situation as you as a group, right? Or a community of people who face the same situations. There has to be a sense of pride, and that pride, lead to empowerment in some way, right? And so the mindset would be like, hey, from my worldview, I've done things with my own hand. And even though others may be of a different economic strata, right? They could be middle class, upper middle class, they may not have built their own communities out. They may be of privilege or given money or, the ability to get that job because they knew somebody at the job or something of the sort. Yeah, I think that's a good sort of a good example there, Kashe. Anyone else? Charles, what were your thoughts about it?
Yeah, like Kyle said, like I think we just talk about the factors that comes with the housing, while people wouldn't want to do housing to live in a like free life. Because I was comparing it to like now that housing is available for them, but sometimes people don't take advantage of it because of what happens after they take that housing program.
What do you mean after they?
Like, don't they have to like start working and like they have to like pay um basically the responsibilities that it comes with? And we're talking about the factors of the mental health. What if they have mental health issues and drug problem? And yeah.
Okay, so that's a wonderful, I think, place to start with maybe leading into the chapter, right? So with thinking about society at large, the communities within a society, and how society is organized, right? In which case, how they're organized leads to maybe divisions, right? And these divisions can say maybe different groups have more access or easier access or less barriers to different opportunities, different power structures, and other groups may face some sort of oppressive measures because of these gaps or separations. Now, in terms of homelessness, what are some of each one of you all's perspectives on why is there such a big homeless crises in America based on these structures in place, based on these systems in place? What are some of your theories on why this is a crisis to begin with? And maybe we can talk about how we can help that sort of crises or advocate for, making some sort of change or something. Who has a theory?
I have a theory. This is at least in the case of Los Angeles. I forget what year it was, but it was like millions of dollars were raised for, were allocated toward reducing the homeless crisis. So what they do with that money is they give it to housing developers, and housing developers don't necessarily build shelters because no neighborhood wants a homeless shelter in their neighborhood. So there's nowhere for that money to really go, or if it is put in certain developers' hands. They just build affordable housing, which is a shoebox for $1,500 a month, which is not affordable even for me. So it's a really fucked situation, at least in LA. Sorry for my language. I kind of forgot I was in class for a minute.
No, it's
Something I'm
okay.
kind of passionate about, but yeah. And another thing about LA is housing or homeless communities will create like little tent cities, and then upon no warning, the authorities will come and remove all of their stuff and leave them with absolutely nothing, but there's also nowhere for them to go.
Mhm.
So it's a major problem in LA. It's very, very, very sad to see.
Megan, just
Yeah.
like jumping off of that, I live in LA as well, and I live in like Santa Monica, Brentwood area, and they actually like I moved here a few years ago, and probably within like the last year, and I don't know if this is happening like other places in LA, but like they've actually started building like there's like a big park by my house, for example, and like where it used to be like covered in tents, they've now built, it's not affordable housing and it's not tents, it's something in the middle, like trying to think of the word, like trailers kind of, but not really a trailer, but it's like an area with like showers and like all of this stuff, whatever. So I think in some of these areas they're trying to kind of, because the homeless situation in LA especially is so bad, like especially after COVID, everything just got substantially worse. So I wonder if they'll start building more of these like trailer type, but it's not like a,
I think I know what you're talking about. There's more like community housing where people share bathrooms and.
yes, but it's actually it's
Wait, are you
great
talking about
because
by the VA?
yes, by the VA, that's like right
Oh,
where
like,
I live.
Yeah, they're like I don't know how to describe that either. It's like
Yes.
they're almost like how you see like tiny homes.
Okay.
Yeah.
They're small. I would say maybe like 4
Like
foot by 6
modular, like
feet.
almost modular or something?
Yeah, and I think they
Yes.
put them, I don't know if it's actually in the cemetery, but it's like it's a large part of land
It's
that's
separate
part
from
of
the
VA.
cemetery. But it's great, and like I mean, especially because in Brentwood, for example, like there's just such a disparity of wealth in this area where it's like $14 million homes, and then this like park that was overrun with tent, like it's like mind-boggling. So I think that this and likely I'm sure a lot of those people in those communities, like for that's what you're saying, Megan, it's like people don't want these like tents in their neighborhoods, like people complain about it and whatever, but I actually think that this situation, these modulars, trailers, whatever we want to call them, is a really great solution to the problem for what it is. It would be great to see more of them around the city.
Yeah, that's really cool. I haven't seen that here. I live in Hollywood in like a very dense area, so I don't know how that would work over here. I also wonder if like Santa Monica has different city ordinance or Brentwood.
Santa Monica does, but Brentwood is like with the rest of Los Angeles. But
Well, I'm also not 100% sure. I heard this from a person, so I don't know if this is 100% true, but I heard that there's a little bit of conflict actually about those sort of modular ones that they've set up on the west side, because you can only stay there or get resources from there if you are a veteran. So for homeless people that did not serve in the military, they may not have access to those services. And I don't know of any others that are quite that prevalent on the west side. That's kind of the only one. And it's great that there are resources for veterans, but there are also people that are homeless that did not. So.
All right, excellent. So to sum up, what do we kind of theorize there are major issues of homelessness? Like, what are some of the systemic problems that create, these issues? In which case, we have to kind of build, modular homes now and build these community housing, right? Shared bathrooms and all this stuff. But what is sort of the genesis you think, systemically, that gives rise to those issues?
I think one of the biggest issues out here in Tennessee is they will do all the advocating and collecting funds and stuff to say that they want to help the homeless and do all this. And just like Megan was saying earlier, some of the people don't want them in that neighborhood because they don't want to bring down the value of their neighborhoods or what have you. But my biggest issue with Memphis is they'll say they got so many million of dollars that they, don't raised and formed and everything, and they want to do this and that, but then another issue will come up and they say that I have to put the money into something else that was more major for the city or whatever. And I put on the board meeting one day that man, we got like 10, 12 schools down here that are 2 and 3 stories. Y'all still pay the light bills on this stuff. Why we can't turn those classrooms into dormitories and let these folks come in here and stay? It's already got a community kitchen. It's already got a gym. You don't necessarily have to build them anything. You can take these buildings you got sitting around here and use those. I just think that because some people, it becomes a mental aspect to me. Okay, well, they can walk around and do just like I can. So why they can't get off their tail and go make something happen? But you don't know what put them in that position. So once again, we back to the mental aspect of it. You don't know what they went to get there. So you don't know what it's going to take to get them out of there. And without a helping hand, you can't do anything. So I just think it's a lot of political aspects behind it that throws it off.
Yeah, in which case you have to think it's always political, right? As Megan talked about, well, the funds are being dispersed to these developers, right? These developers own their own businesses, so obviously they're doing very well if they're getting the funds to develop new housing, but the housing is either inappropriate or people are ill-informed about the housing, or it doesn't really meet the needs of the problem itself. Right, so you say that, okay, well, we have a political problem of dispersing the funds. Once again, the businesses seem to be doing better off than the individuals who actually need the help. And so it just creates an environment to where doesn't address the problem, just puts a Band-Aid, right? A political Band-Aid on it for people to maybe get a particular votes or something like that. Anybody else want to contribute to that? All right. So yeah, thinking politically, right? Thinking politically is always political. Why? Because we live within a government. So it's always about power structures, authorities, et cetera, et cetera. And so now, since we've gone through all our chapters, we have to redirect our minds to think in a very large viewpoint, right? One, we live amongst institutions, government's institution, and government divides people in classes and groups and communities. Two, we have a history, and that history, once again, like pretty much any other country, has led to certain individuals or certain groups or communities having access and power to resources that are necessary to thrive and grow, while others have not, right? We could say those communities have been disenfranchised or have not had equitable access to the same things that others have. And now what could we do as future therapists or current therapists or psychologists, right? So we have the information on hand, which is our theories, concepts, these models, right? All the things we have in the DSM and stuff with the APA, but we have new challenges because now we are finally connected in this world, right? The technology has allowed people to become extremely aware of what's actually going on all over the place. And now we actually have the ability to communicate extremely quickly to make changes within these structures and frameworks. So with that understanding, how do we make a change, make a difference. But before we get into all that, let's move to the next group. Haneen, who was in your group?
I had Kashay and Madison.
Okay, and what did you discuss?
Yeah, so we talked about a lot of different things. We mostly discussed one of Kashay's questions, and I can briefly summarize it, but if either of you want to add anything. But basically we're just talking about how, within like a therapeutic setting or a therapeutic relationship, ultimately it's, a one-on-one kind of situation like therapist client. But if, you're addressing like a social justice issue or an issue that has like systematic implications that can't be solved just in a one-on-one, I'm willing to work on this kind of situation. How do we go about addressing that? And it's almost like, why do we even engage in these conversations or engage in these like therapeutic relationships if, we know that we can't necessarily really help, we can't really, solve the whole systematic issue. So if it's kind of like a futile effort, like why do we even do it in the first place?
Okay. So think of it this way, you will get your degrees and you'll move on, and from your viewpoint, maybe you're thinking, hey, I'm gonna work hopefully with multicultural individuals, and I'm gonna do case-by-case analysis and help people and try to understand the differences. And that could be one point of view. Or you can have a broader lens and say, okay, I want to do that work with individuals, but I also want to make a change, right? Because I've received my education, I have done a lot of research, have a lot of information to give out to people to make changes. Therefore, are there institutions, are there organizations, are there not-for-profits? Can I create my own organization? Can I lobby, right? Can I go before bodies of government to advocate for the needs that I see out in these communities so that we can, try to help people be more equitable? And that definition is basically giving everyone the same access to be thriving, right? Give everyone the same sort of access to meet their needs. Not make everyone equal, right? We don't want to live in a fantasy world where everyone's equal, because we're not. We're all different, right? People want different things. But to have the environment so that everyone has the same access to potentiality to grow, to meet their needs so that they're not suffering. And also try to remove a lot of the barriers that create biases, racism, prejudice, disenfranchisement, all of the above. So one is link yourself with an organization, right? An institution, a cause, a movement. Create your own organization, right? And still do your work as a counselor, right? As a therapist on an individual basis. Second is, hey, you being an advocate, you can lobby. You can go speak in front of governmental bodies because you will be an expert on the subject, right? You will be someone who will have the information that others need. Two is working with other community and groups to try to help them establish how. So think for what Megan said. Hey, they're dispersing funds for housing. Did they consult anyone who may have worked with those community of homeless people to say, what are the actual needs what are the minimum standard of needs for the housing, right? Are you just dispersing funds and giving it to a construction company or development? Or actually doing what would be the right thing to do, the appropriate thing to do is have someone go in and maybe survey the area, talk about the different types of people within the homeless community. Maybe there's different disparities that they have amongst each other, getting more information than just giving money. Because the money appears to be there, right? The part that's not there is the part that requires accurate information, psychologists, therapists, researchers, people who live cross-culturally and culturally, all of these other factors. And that's where we come. All right, so we come in by using our skill sets to look at what's actually needed to make, changes in maybe laws, policies, helping them to disperse money appropriately, things of that nature, and just advocating for the change, right? Now, I don't believe that, it's futile. I think there's a high demand for it, right? I think that there's a high demand. We need more people involved, right? And I think it's slowly starting to become a thing. People are starting to understand how important culture and differences and the history and the disenfranchisement impacts people's well-being and how to make those things change. So yeah, hopefully that answered a little bit of your question, but your other group members, what did you have to say about it?
I'm sorry, y'all. I was not paying attention. Professor, I gotta go. My daughter's pregnant and her water just broke.
Oh, okay, well, congratulations. And
Thank you.
I'll
Sorry,
figure out-
y'all.
Yeah, email me or something later on.
Okay, thank you.
All right, see ya. Well, that was that was interesting. All right, so yeah, who else was in your group? Madison, did you have any thoughts on it or anything?
Yeah, we sort of we kind of jumped around a little bit throughout the conversation, but sort of circling back to what Haneen was referring to, Kashay's question. I sort of brought in, I had a professor in my undergrad who sort of took a somewhat extreme approach with a client who was really resistant to treatment. He worked primarily in prisons with incarcerated individuals, and this client was that had mandatory counseling, that it was his job to be there, and it was the client's job to also be there. So like neither one of them could really not be there. They had to go, and his strategy was, okay, well, if you're determined to be combative and waste my time, then I'm gonna bring other work that I need to do into my session, and whenever you want to talk, you let me know. I'm all yours, all my attention, but until then, you're not going to waste my time. And he presented it as a little bit of like an ethics question of like, I took all this time to get educated, and I'm a service provider, and I should be providing services to clients that want them and need them. And so if you're not going to take advantage of this time you have with the resource, I'm going to use myself as the resource to continue helping other clients. And so we kind of talked about that a little bit, and sort of whether or not that we felt that was appropriate or not. And we just kind of, everybody was like, that's really extreme, but kind of cool. And, could you do that with a client? I don't know if I could.
Well, I think that even if you're not able to work with a client, right, if it gets to that point to where you say, well, okay, I don't want to force anyone to do anything, right? That would be unethical, right? Or unprofessional in some sense. But I still know that there is an individual who needs some sort of help in their life with some issues. Could you still maybe communicate a referral, right? A referral to someone else who you feel might be better suited. Yeah, I don't think you want to leave someone just, out in the cold like that, but at the same time, you don't want to force anything, right? Not everything is going to work out perfectly for you always. Work with particular people or groups or individuals. So yeah, maybe extreme, but I think you could still refer somebody to someone else. Communicate. Anyone else about that sort of concern that Haneen was talking about, and like, what could we do to make a change? Like, how do we go about as therapists to help entire communities, right? Create a change in the laws and the structures, and maybe create movements politically, lobby. Like, anybody has any other thoughts on that? Anyone here has thought about starting a not-for-profit organization or for-profit organization as part of their practice or something? Jasmine, so you're shaking your head. What are you thinking? What's your idea?
Well, it's still in the works. So my first master's degree is in public service management. So I learned a lot about the importance of policy and advocacy. And so hopefully I can find a way to build that bridge. That's my ultimate goal. So I'm really excited about this topic in this chapter. So.
Okay. Have you thought about anything particular, like maybe organizations you could align yourself with, or political groups, or lawmakers, or anything?
Well, so I'm currently working in the realm of housing and homelessness, and mental health. And so I guess just trying to figure out and learn more about the sector and some of the gaps. Yeah, I'm very passionate about the homeless population. So it's the need for supportive services. I currently do in-home therapy for people who are currently in supportive housing. And so really understanding that there is much difficulty with keeping people housed, and understanding that mental health is one of the key factors that that they deal with, especially knowing that they also too have co-occurring disorders. So not just mental health, but substance use. And I also too work with HIV/AIDS participants. And so it's heavy. So I'm still trying to figure out how to, fill in the gap as to what other agencies, especially in the city of Chicago, where they're missing the mark. So.
Yeah, have you ever been down by like Roosevelt Avenue and see like some of the camping out over there?
Yes. So for some time I worked as a, I guess it was kind of an outreach. So I would work with people who are street homeless to get them into housing and do those housing assessments, and do the homeless. In Chicago, we have an annual homeless count. So really engage in the population to make sure that the city knows the accurate count for funding.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Jasmine, who was in, just leading back off with you, who was in your group?
Yeah, so Chandler and Megan, our group spoke much about cultural flexibility. We talked about Megan's excerpt. Megan, I don't know if you want to share the excerpt.
Yeah, I can read it. So, although these authors identified self-awareness as a core facet of cultural intelligence, they argued that a certain level of cognitive flexibility is critical because novel cultural situations require a constant adaptation of self-concept to understand a new environment. So we kind of talked about that, like what we think that means and like how to actually participate in this or be able to do it. And we kind of talked about just like a general theme of this class about like, or at least something that really struck with me, and it turned out the others in my group as well, about like first and foremost being a humanitarian over anything, and being there to like hold space and hear other people's stories and sort of cast your own perceptions or bias or judgments aside and sort of showing up as a blank slate is kind of being cognitively flexible in our mind. Yeah, that's kind of what we talked about.
All right, so cognitively flexible, right? So let's say maybe there's two things happening. One, we'll take our own personal conditioning. So we as individuals have been conditioned to primarily be who we are, right? Maybe it's 50-50, right? Half is our own genetics and hereditary. The other half is how we were taught, right? Our viewpoints, what's important, what's valuable, what's meaningful, tastes and preferences, biases, all of that stuff. Right. And then the other part would be like, okay, what have we learned? What have we been educated? We've been educated in a Western dominant conceptualization of the psyche, right? how the mind impacts the body, how the body impacts the mind, all of these different things. Which is great, right? We should have some sort of basis or principle of the field we are going into. But we also have to be extremely innovative, which means we have to be able to attribute our own personal viewpoints, experiences, and maybe our own research to challenge some of the current models, to challenge some of the current theories, to challenge some of the things we read, some of the things we've been taught, right? Because we are evolving extremely quickly due to the information age in which we live. Now we have a high awareness of, wow, okay, I get the general principle on this disorder, right? Or I get the general theory on this concept of how to help someone. But it's a lot deeper than just what we've been taught, right? The context changes which each new person that we meet, a new challenge because of their own worldviews, their experiences, et cetera, right? And even another layer of adding what we're talking about this week, we say, okay, well, besides even the culture, another layer is like, wow, there is a system in place. There's a structure in society. How does the structure in society impact people's well-being? You know, so part of my research, when I was doing dissertation, dealt with how does apartheid, right? So talking about South African apartheid. How does prolonged exposure to racism, right? To living in a structure where you experience racism on a day-to-day basis for years and years and years, how does that impact your actual physical, your physiological health, right? Not even just your mental health, but can that stuff cause immune suppression? Can that stuff make people sick and die at an earlier age than their counterparts who don't experience that on a daily basis, right? Because that's anxiety and that's stress. So throwing on a layer of saying, wow, politics. So if you really stop and think about this, you could think politics actually can kill people earlier than what they would normally live. You're like, wow, that's interesting. Politics can kill people? Yeah, it can. That could be a research study right there. How politics can make you die at an earlier age. Why? Because politics creates the classification and divisions and structures which can create people to experience prolonged trauma, mental trauma, social trauma, right? It can create environments for sex trafficking. It can create environments for prolonged exposure to prejudice and racism, right? Homophobic exposures, things like that. And like, well, that translates into anxiety and stress kills people. Stress can kill people and cause all sorts of diseases and viruses and make those things last longer than what they normally would. So if we think about all of that, like, well, that's pretty intricate. We haven't gotten there yet to kind of reformulate or reconceptualize adding all of those markers into the practice, right? So for all we know, we just address a disorder based on what the DSM says for, you know, mild, moderate, severe criteria, et cetera, but there's a lot more to be added onto that. And that's sort of where this class, I think, you know, as it comes to a close, we should start thinking that what we've learned so far is not the end all be all, because there's a lot more stuff to think about, right? There's a lot more things to add context to helping people. So now that was just the individual basis, and then we say, well, how do I help communities? How do I help entire groups of people, which is even more powerful? Helping individuals takes we kind of help individuals so the group can change. That takes an exceptionally long time. And there may not be enough money to do that, may not be enough time to do that. So thinking of innovative ways of how we can bring how do we break the barriers that's already been in place? So if politics creates structures of barriers placed up, how do we as social justice advocates and therapists break the barriers so that we can create more, get closer to a homogenized organism of we're just all human, right, facing issues, right? But how do we eliminate the barriers of racism, prejudice, all sorts of biases, things like that. So yeah, we got a long way to go. Anyone else want to add anything? Chandler, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I can add something. Maybe it was just kind of summing up what we were talking about. But when I was kind of thinking of cognitive flexibility, again, just kind of on theme with what we've just learned a lot in the class of just, like I felt like cognitive flexibility kind of went hand in hand with just openness and like, not even putting your own like cultural aspects to the side, but more so just like being open to like knowing that you're different, and just kind of understanding that like we have different views, we see the world a bit differently, but I can still help you, and put like, even if I don't agree with something you believe in, like not allowing that to affect the therapeutic relationship. That's just kind of what I was thinking about with cognitive flexibility, and just kind of having that openness and not taking away like your own self of self or self of like who you are, but still kind of incorporating that and still being open to everything else and everyone else who you help.
Yeah, I mean, it's excellent. That's exactly what we need to do. I think this chapter talks about kind of what critical consciousness, right? So critical consciousness, like looking at issues that individuals have, the issues that they face, and adding the socio-political like reality of their life to the context of the issues that they face. Right, so we could say, well, okay, you face this issue. Okay, that sounds like a very personal, individual thing. But are there outside forces? Is there things in place in the real world that kind of create or dictate you to have the issues that you have? Right, so is there a socio-political reality out there that may be driving this individual to experience the issues that they have, right? And so they may not be alone in that. Maybe a host of individuals just like them who have certain issues, but really there's a bigger issue. The bigger issue is that there's an outside external force, politically, economically, socially, that is driving, driving their issue to be what it is. And so we help them solve their problem. We obviously don't help solve the bigger socio-political problem. That means the problem will still be out there to exist and maybe exacerbate or be reoccurring, and they'll be back. They'll be back experiencing the issue once again. Thus, we say, well, we have to think in a bigger mind frame now, because helping individuals when there's social forces out there is not the trick if we're trying to truly help everyone. To help everyone, we need to actually go to the root cause, which is a socio-political one for most issues, I would say, right? We're creating the type of trauma that people face that led one action to create another action, right? Looking at the various actions, the sequences of actions that have taken place to lead people to be where they are today. So yeah, I guess it's that critical consciousness part that they were discussing, and that would probably be more of a detailed sort of context to kind of observe with ourselves. Okay, excellent. And I think last group Maya, are you, did I get to you yet?
No, not yet.
Okay, and who is in your group?
Chloe.
Chloe, you and Chloe. Okay.
I had brought up an excerpt from the textbook just about fostering cultural competence in the workplace and how they said that one of the things was to bring it up to the board of advisors or the organizational stakeholders to review any of their policies and statements to make sure diversities, there are no implications or anything. But my question was, what if like you're working for a big organization or something like that, and you notice an inconsistency and you mention it, but nothing is being, the message isn't being relayed to them, or just nobody's getting back to you? What would be like the next steps as a clinician?
Oh, man. As a clinician, I would maybe schedule some meetings. First, I would maybe schedule meetings with those at the top, if possible, to address those concerns and to express why I believe those concerns are critical in the first place. And therefore try to get some feedback so that you could properly assess, well, is it a matter of resources, right, that they can address this? Is it a matter of training or anything that you could think of? Or is it a matter of they're completely disregarding that issue that may be important to you? And now you have to say, well, I guess the values of this organization don't necessarily align with mine, right? And I want to advocate for something different than I think this organization is going to be able to address. And I guess you would have to take those steps to maybe leave or start your own organization, right? Or something of the sort, right? Or just create some sort of awareness even outside of the organization. Let's say you do stay with the organization. Maybe you could do something on the side that doesn't violate any sort of policy or public policy to bring awareness to that issue that really is important to you. So I say there's kind of several ways you can approach it. But I would start by really kind of gathering some feedback to be like, is this a real thing that they do not care about the same, by speaking to the people at the top. Once I've gauged that information, I'm like, okay, now I have to take steps to move forward and try something different. Chloe, did you have anything?
Yeah, my question was basically just around, well, I had two. The first one was just like being a therapist. We talk a lot about the like power dynamics that happen between therapist and client. And when talking about like very complex societal problems and social justice issues, I just feel like there's a lot of pressure and also responsibility on therapists to, like, I don't know what the word is, but it's not like do the right thing, but it's like, I feel like if you're not being very intentional and operating from like a standpoint of like being educated and like just being really careful, you could potentially do more harm than good with some of these things. And so that's just like kind of one thing that I was sort of thinking about. And then also I was just thinking about, like, from the civil rights article, like during the civil rights movement that we lived through most recently, I know that I feel like even just like through this program, my professors and different therapists have talked about how that was like a really, really difficult time to be a therapist, just because there was so much going on from a social justice standpoint. So I just was also kind of thinking about that. So just like this idea of like kind of like using power, like just like power and making sure that like you're being intentional in your practice. And then also like this idea of like empathy fatigue among therapists, and like just I wonder like how that experience was. So
yeah, I mean, it's hard work. It's challenging, right? It's challenging because we are experiencing a lot of cultural shifts, a lot of political movements. We are extremely polarized politically in this country, right? So we got polarization happening where one side does not want to even remotely hear the opinions of others, which transfers in through society, which means people don't want to hear the viewpoints of others who do not share the same beliefs or opinions or meanings. So that makes our job even more difficult because now we're in a very sensitive time, right? Everyone, you know, a lot of people are sensitive culturally or for other reasons of the sort. But the challenge is good. The challenge is good because it's now we're beginning to start to question a lot of stuff, you know, so a lot of stuff that are within the principles of the things that we've studied in school, right? The university, at the undergrad, at the graduate level, things that we study and say, great, this is a pretty good base. This is a good base, but we're evolving. And so now how do we kind of shift the way that we think even about the stuff we learn? And actually there's one of the sort of quotes or from this chapter, right, from Martin Barrow. And basically he was saying that it shouldn't be theories that define the problems of our situation, but rather the problems that demand and so to speak, select their own theorization. Basically saying, instead of thinking, let me apply this model theory concept to this person. First, let me try to truly understand what the problem is, right? By seeing it their way, how it's meaningful to them, what's important to them. What are the layers to this context from a cultural point of view, from a political, you know, maybe they're socially stressed. There's some other factors. And then maybe we can adopt our own theories. We can adopt our own models, our own concepts on how to approach these new particular problems, right? Adding the context of culture into it and politics. So in which case it's almost giving us, if we are to become multicultural therapists, is giving us a little bit of liberty to try to create something new, try to create applicable new, you know, theories or paradigms to, you know, to these situations. And if you think of it that way, you'd be like, well, okay, now it's, at first it seemed challenging, now it seems exciting. It seems exciting because you could be on the forefront of some groundbreaking research on how to help these new problems in dealing with the context of culture and politics, right? And prejudice and all these things and how they impact communities and individuals as we move forward. But the chapter also talked about like ability to question one's own understanding, which I think is extremely challenging. You think like, well, I understand something this way, right? From what I've been trained and thought, this is how I understand it. Great, great, that's how you understand it. But what I talked about before is like meta thinking. Can you question your own understanding? Are you able to question what you currently understand to say, well, this is the threshold. This is as far as I could go with that, right? And if you're able to question yourself, you might be able to find new discoveries of either why you may understand something that way and why you can't take it any further than what you currently understand it. That one's a pretty interesting idea from the chapter. All right, any other questions before we start the lecture? All right, before we start lecture, I want to say if there's anything missing grade-wise, shoot me an email. You know, if there's anything mismarked or, you know, any of like the discussions or anything not up there that's been graded, Either send it to me in an email so I could get all, proper grades up, because I'll be grading, trying to wrap up all the grading probably by tomorrow or something. All right. If there's anything missing, send it to me. All right. So I can get all that graded. All right. So how about before we do the lecture, let's take a couple minutes to review the video. So let's take another 10-minute break. We'll review the human trafficking video. I'll let you review it. And then we'll come back and have a conversation about that before we start lecture. How's that sound? Okay. All right, so let's watch maybe about 10 minutes of the video, and then we'll have a discussion about it. 1 second. All right, I'm going to share my screen now so that we can watch a little bit of the video.
That we have to address. I'm Tama Bryant Davis, president of the Society for the Psychology of Women, and we felt it was so important to raise awareness about the mental health components and effects of modern day human trafficking and slavery. And so that's what we attempt to do during this series. You're going to hear from psychologists, hear from survivors, and then hear what you can do to make a difference.
It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and after drug dealing, human trafficking is the second largest illegal industry or criminal industry in the world, and it's growing rapidly on a yearly basis. This is happening in our backyards. This is happening in suburbia. This is happening in San Diego, where I'm from in DC. This is happening all over this country right here. This is happening at an alarming rate. I spent so much time medicating myself and hold on to my pain that I could step out of it and just do what you're supposed to do. I was still fighting.
My adopted daughter, I adopted her when she was 2 years, way back in Uganda. And when I left Uganda for the United States, I left her in the care of my sister, my young sister. After some years, my sister passed away, and this child had nowhere to go. So she stayed with friends, and that's where she met the person who brought her here, promising that she was going to show her to me.
Trafficking is about somebody approaching you and telling you, I'm here to help you. I'm here to offer you something good. And it turns out that the reality becomes something very different.
They promised her that they were going to show her to me, that they are going to put her in school, and they were going to give her a better life. And she believed them. So when she reached the United States, she was put under house arrest. She was told not to speak on the phone. She was told not to talk to anybody. She was told that they don't know me and they don't know where I am.
Well, basically, human trafficking involves three major elements. That there's force, fraud, and coercion to get somebody involved in being a trafficked person. I mean, they're affected at psychological, behavioral, medical, physical. It is just devastating. You know, the price is steep for the effects that happen to them.
Trafficking has nothing to do with transportation. No legal definition includes the word transportation. This is a common misunderstanding about trafficking. It has to do, as Nancy said, force, fraud, and coercion. That's the legal definition. I want us psychologists to develop our own language. It has to do with control, coercion, and exploitation. Third-party control. You have a buyer and a seller. Most of the research has been done on victims, but there's a buyer and a seller who are equal parties to the crime.
I was molested at 5 years old. I wasn't taught about my body. I wasn't taught about sex. When I was 5, the Caucasian guy would pick me up and he would give me 50 cents, $1. My mind was conditioned as a young child to you have sex, the sex is associated with money. Those were two things that led to my life of prostitution and then the sex trafficking.
If there's one place where everything bad that can possibly happen to women happens, it's in trafficking for prostitution. Domestic violence, sexual violence, racism as an integral part of everything. Poverty made worse, discrimination, organized crime jumps into the mix. It's just where if you can think of some way to hurt women, that's where it's all happening. There's a complexity to addressing the harm of trafficking for prostitution. And that complexity is a result of the fact that we're talking about domestic violence, we're talking about sexual violence, racist violence, poverty, childhood trauma and neglect, and we're also talking about organized crime. And this is what few people are talking about yet, but it's critical to get there. Governmental and community complicity with the crime of trafficking. Sex trafficking is the global form of prostitution. People in prostitution, people who have been trafficked, describe it in these words: volunteer slavery, and the choice that's not a choice. And in those words, you can see the appearance and the reality of what we're talking about. A woman in a legal Nevada brothel, legal prostitution, said, "No one really enjoys getting sold. It's like you sign a contract to be raped."
This guy, a beautiful black man, dressed really, really nice. And he'd come up to the school and see me and talk with me and, just made me feel like I was just so special, what I did not receive at home. And so he asked me to go to a motel room with him. So I go to the motel, it was RC, that's what I call it. And as soon as I got in the room and he had me take off my clothes, he took a wire clothes hanger and he hit me. And he hit me. And I couldn't feel it anymore. And he was hitting and I couldn't feel it. And I couldn't feel it. and I couldn't feel it, and he just kept hitting. And then he told me that I had to go out on the street. He told me what I had to do. He told me how much money I had to ask the person for. And I just remember I didn't have any more feelings. I didn't have any more feelings. I didn't feel anything, nothing. And they're affected at psychological, behavioral, medical, physical. It is just devastating. You know, the price is steep for the effects that happen to them. To me, what's most salient and what's most interesting and challenging is how much people's ability to trust is affected. And that just poses a series of complications clinically. I've sat with people who really don't trust me at all. It takes being interested in being with people where they're at. And the providers that we work with, I would say that's probably their biggest challenge too.
I'm the founder and executive director of PAVE. It's Promoting Awareness, Victim Empowerment. I founded PAVE to use art education and grassroots action to shatter the silence of sexual and domestic violence. This is a huge problem, and the silence that surrounds these issues allows this public health crisis to continue. So here's where it gets a little tough. We're going to share some real life stories, and I share these with you to really give face. PAVE as an organization believes in the power of using survivor stories. Now, the consumers of this, and this is one thing that I can't drive home enough, the consumers were high-profile community members, various law enforcement, dean of students, well-known businessmen in the community consuming people, children, and they became a slave in their own home, and both think that their mothers knew about what was going on. Amanda, it started when I was really young. I didn't know what was happening. All I know was that it hurt. My dad would bring me to the basement. It was more of a torture chamber. He'd tie me up and literally whip me. Him and his law enforcement friends used me. He loved to let other men and women do the same. And he forced me to watch him do these things to other girls. He loved the pain more than anything. Stacy, my stepfather began to sexually abuse me when I was 5 years old. He moved us into a multi-million-dollar home, but he put my room in the basement. The first time he sexually abused me, he had to cut me in order to penetrate me. That same night, his doctor friend came over, and I heard the words that I will never forget as long as I live. The doctor said, "This is how you do it without doing too much damage." The doctor then proceeded to rape me as well. The younger child, the more money that men will pay. At the end of the day, my stepfather would always tell me that I had to make more money the next day if I ever wanted to see my mother again. Again, fear. I was trapped, literally trapped in this basement room. Day after day, men would come in and have sex with me however they wanted. Most of them were sadistic in nature, and all they cared about was seeing how much pain they could cause. Now, there's a lot of victim blame that goes on. Stacy, in terms of self-blame, I really thought that
All right, sorry, but for time, say 30, just kind of want to have discussions about that. So any takeaways from the video that we watched in terms of how we could go about helping change some of even the dynamics of sex trafficking? How could we advocate to help sort of get rid of the whole systemic issues behind it? Really, have any points about the video at all?
Oops, sorry. One takeaway for me was, and I think that they called this out in the video, and like this, I do believe is a common misconception, is that human trafficking has nothing to do with like the actual transport or moving of people. And it can actually be so subtle and like, so like just not like blatantly and explicit as I think, because it's so horrible and it sounds like you would see it and you would be able to spot it in a second, but actually it's very invisible. It happens way more than we think it does. And actually, I think that some people due to the like manipulation and coercion that takes place in order to be able to sex traffic somebody, like you might not even know if that's happening to you right away. So it's, yeah, I just think that they need to rename it, honestly, because the name itself doesn't fit what it actually looks like.
Yeah, so basically you're saying that it's so deeply embedded into the dynamics into either the perpetrators or the victims of it, that it almost seems like you're just watching some sort of natural thing take place or something, right? Like it's hard to identify that anything is out of the ordinary occurring.
Yeah, like I think people have this idea of when they think of sex trafficking that like it happens in like that it you would be able to spot it in a second, and it's happening in like only very low income areas, and like you like just all of these things that like, you know, like it feels very like untouchable to you, but like it's I mean, if you look at the statistics, like it literally affects, I think it's like 1 in 4 women. And so it's like that just shows that it is literally all around us.
Yeah, I mean, there's just astounding just how it happens under like our nose, right? It could be things in our own communities that we are even unaware of that these things are occurring because just how insidious, you know, the perpetrators are of it, and getting people to go along with it. They try to make it seem as if it's just a natural, you know, process of behavior or something. Anyone else have anything they want to add about the video or sex trafficking or the systems in place that, you know, to kind of foster that type of stuff?
I can add on to kind of what Chloe was saying about like kind of renaming that, because I feel like there's just not enough awareness of like what real sex trafficking is and like how common it is. Because like for me, like obviously now things have changed, but I feel like all growing up, like I think of sex trafficking, like, you know, that movie Taken, like they're in a foreign country, like they just get taken, they get sex trafficked all around. Like that's kind of in my head, you know, the notion of sex trafficking, what I thought kind of growing up. So, you know, hearing, you know, those women's stories of like, you know, like it was my dad, it was my stepdad, it was, you know, that it's so common and it happens to like so many girls. I think just even bringing that awareness and like in your own practicing, spotting those kind of things even like within, you know, your clients, because also like it doesn't just happen to women, it happens to, you know, men also. So even just kind of like being able to spot any type of things like that going on is like really important. So,
yeah. I think what was kind of stood out is thinking of it from a more holistic perspective, in that, all right, there's several parties involved in the transaction, right? So we got a buyer, a seller, right? And an individual in between, right? That transaction. And we're like, well, there's issues at each stage, right? First, why is someone who would want to purchase another human being under traumatic circumstances and to use them in that way? What has caused those individuals to have those sort of mental ideations or impulses, desires, or to behave in that way? Other part is the seller. What would cause someone to want to sell another human being for commercial purposes in such an insidious way, right? And the big part is, you know, obvious, the person who's doing the work itself and the trauma that they're experiencing over time of being essentially, you know, a slave in some capacity. And the fourth part will be, well, are there systems in place, power structures, hierarchies, political, economic, that kind of foster for that transaction to even occur, right? For that thing to even happen at the onset. So how do we sort of break down the structures of that whole entire system by bringing advocacy, awareness, you know, more mental health services for everybody, people who are either sexual deviants of some kind, right, or experience some sort of childhood trauma to where they want to have authority over another human being, obviously the victims of it, and how do we change those structures in place too. So, you know, it's, to me, that was the part that kind of stood out to me of looking like, hey, there's a lot more things complicit in the totality of the transaction itself. And so how do we approach that from a holistic point of view? Like, what could we do as psychologists, as therapists, whether with an organization, institution, just our own personal advocacy and trying to bring awareness to it, or getting rules changed, laws, or making just the community aware that that's happening in their communities, those sorts of things. Anyone else?
I found it interesting that you brought up the topic of just the power structures that come in place, and it reminded me of the R. Kelly situation and the amount of advocacy and storytelling that was required, you know, from so many different parties in order to really kind of bring down that entire structure to support his conviction. So I think we're on the right track when it comes to just promoting awareness, because dealing with that much power in those types of institutions, if you're not in it, it seems like there's a lot of secrecy in it. It's just really difficult to really kind of permeate those types of situations and structures when it comes to trafficking. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned the R. Kelly situation. So I went to grammar school across the street from R. Kelly's house in Chicago. I was in grade school, and R. Kelly was like at the height of his career. I was maybe in like 6th grade. And I remember distinctively a lot of girls telling me in 6th grade that they were going to R. Kelly's house across the street. And they described exactly what it looked like on the inside. He had a half-court basketball court. He had a barber shop in there. They could tell you every room, how to get in and get out. And back then, as a kid, you know, I'm not thinking anything really of it. I'm like, oh, okay, R. Kelly, that's cool, you know. And then later on, you know, you get all this information about, you know, he had been doing a lot of stuff in that house. That was in Lincoln Park in Chicago, right? Which is one that people who've never been to Chicago, Lincoln Park is like a really good neighborhood, right? A really fancy schmancy neighborhood. And that was like in 1992 or something like that. So you think of, yeah, I mean, these things intersect and impact a lot of people's lives, and eventually it becomes personal because we would have known somebody that suffered maybe that same type of trauma or something of the sort. And so we have these power structures to say, well, who allowed R. Kelly to even, there had to be other security guards, people, who would have allowed that to even happen? Why were people silent? Was it because of the money? Was it because of retribution, fear? How is he allowed, you know? And obviously if other people knowing about this happening, how come no one spoke up, you know? So yeah, the power structures, the systemic things in place, you could say, well, even with the R. Kelly situation, like a lot of that could have been possibly avoided, and you know, he could have been, awareness could have been brought to it, and make sure that a lot of people didn't become victims of him. If only people spoke up you know, like spoke up and, or the people who were surrounding him, you know, had intervened or some sort, right? But then you think of the bigger issue, right? Well, was R. Kelly's, what happened to him to want to do that, right? What kind of very famous, wealthy individual can have, you know, can be in a relationship with any of age adult, you know, that he will want, and but you know, target young women for, you know, to create new victims and things like that. So from a holistic point of view, you're kind of like, well, all right, there's a problem with R. Kelly. There's a problem with the people who were obviously surrounding him. There was a structure in place, a system in place, right? So you could describe that as almost a government or a community or something. And then there's also the victims, right? And so we've had to wait for the victims to come out, speak out, but it's like, what about all the other people who knew, right? None of them really gave much information about why those systems were in place and why the system was never brought down from the beginning. In which case, that's where we kind of may be left to us, right? As well as other people, but within our field, we still have some sort of skin in the game on that. What else from the video? Anyone else has anything to contribute? Observations or context? All right, we got just about 15 minutes left. Let's wrap up with the lecture. And at any point in time, I come across something that you have a comment for, just blur out what you want to talk about. So don't just let me talk through the lecture. If there's something you want to, you know, get more in depth on, call it out as I go through. So give me 1 second, I'll share my screen again. All right. All right, counseling for social justice. All right, so we're defining social justice counseling as counseling that recognizes the impact of oppression, privilege, and discrimination on the mental health of individuals. Looking at some examples of this would be educational achievement gaps in school. Are there infrastructures or systems in place that we're not considering that create those gaps of achievement? And are we basing everyone on the same standards, even though we know clearly that there are differences in everyone's experiences? Limited housing, right? Are we not providing opportunities for housing for individuals, or particular types of housing lead to poor results in other social areas? And then poverty, right? Creating what we call equitable access to successful needs, right? Things that make people able to survive within society. Are we making things able to be accessed relatively easy for everyone, right? And we try to want to differentiate between equality and equity. Equity is more providing access for people to be successful. Child exploitation is another one. Racial profiling creates a lot of mental health discrimination. and violence towards racial, ethnic, and sexual minorities. Make sure I'm not forgetting anything. All right, the goal of social justice counseling is to promote access and equity to all persons, particularly those who have been disenfranchised based on cultural or ethnic background. So if you think, well, one person is born wealthy, another person is not, what will be the reason why one person is born with easier access to resources versus another? Well, there's a lot of context there. You could think of a historical context of majority groups versus minority groups, discriminatory practices, transfer of wealth, from one generation to the next, employment opportunities from one generation to the next, and all sorts of hosts of reasons. So we have to provide like a historical context to try and understand why people are disenfranchised within different cultures or different ethnic backgrounds. Right? And our goal would be to try to eradicate oppression, right? Move the needle just slightly for each, opportunity that we have, right? Try to move the needle so we could create more equitable access for everyone. And then empowerment, equitable distribution of power. We want to say we want to distribute power in an equitable way so that everyone's able to access that power and be able to have authority over their own lives and be able to challenge these status quos and also progress within a society. And then we say resilience is behavior and attitudes that clients identify as beneficial in coping with stressful situations and adversity. So we want to pay attention to resilient behaviors, right? What are some of the attitudes that people have that could be helpful in helping them deal with particular things that they feel are stressful and their behaviors towards that. And these stressful situations may involve experiences of violence and trauma based on being a member of an oppressed group. So we definitely want to try to expose those behavior and attitudes to try to promote meaningful ways to get past the violence and the trauma that people experience. Now, LEAD calls for a paradigm shift in order for therapists to engage in social counseling. Therapists must reconceptualize theory and practice of counseling, which means we have the concepts, we have the theories, we have the models, but we may have to reframe them in a new context based on applying cultural background measures, right? And intervene at individual and societal levels. Yes, we want to help individuals, but we understand that by helping to get rid of some of the issues in society, we can help many individuals, right? If not, then we can have reoccurring issues because we're not getting to the root of the bigger problem, which is social structures that have been in place for a very long time. And reject neutrality in counseling that supports status quo, which means we are supposed to be innovative. We are supposed to think forward, right? We're forward thinkers. We have the literature, but we also want to add on some new context to it, right? And engage in self-exploration, including 5 action steps, which is explore personal meaning, explore personal privilege, explore the nature of oppression, right? And work to become multicultural literate. And this is in my way. Let me see if I can move this. And establish a personal social justice compass, which means just being aware of the things that are happening in our society politically, some of the shifts that are occurring. We want to be aware of that and how that could impact different groups that we may come across. The social justice perspectives challenge individualist models by focusing on the social realities of individuals and communities. So we say individuals are part of communities because individuals are part of groups and groups are part of communities. Therefore, they're all interrelated in some context, and the ones that may have the most force are the larger ones, which would be the community. The community would have force over the group, and the group would have force over the individual. They would shape and condition the individual. So we also want to get to the root cause of how the community works, so we can see where the issues originate at its genesis. And they challenge our theories that maintain oppressive discourses in society, which we have had several in this class, right? A lot of things that are hard to talk about, that are difficult. We may feel uncomfortable. We may feel it's out of our league, or someone may be offended or sensitive, but that is all part of the challenge of being in this field, is addressing really, really hard things and also not changing the way we think about them per se, but rather rethinking the way we think about things to see if we could come up to our own new realities about such things. All right, it is clear that models created in different circumstances from our own and assumed to be cross-cultural and trans-historical can lead to a serious distortion of what our peoples are really about. What is needed is the revision from the bottom up of our most basic assumptions in psychological thought, but this revision cannot be made from our offices. It has to come from a praxis or a practice that is committed to the people. This done, truth will not have to be a simple reflection of data, but can become a task at hand, not an account of what has been done, but what needs to be done, right? To sum that up, is saying we need to revise the way that we think about psychology. We need to revise the way we think about some of these models and theories that we've come across. And we need to apply them within our practice in the context of the differences in the cultures that people we come across based on the historical narratives of structures in place that create the issues at hand. All right, three-tier model, advocacy, right? So social change is necessary for the optimal psychosocial health of both therapists and clients. So once again, we can help individuals with their issues by using different techniques that we've been trained with, CBT, all sorts of things. But that's the beginning, right? The optimal psychosocial health of both ourselves and our clients is to engage in a social and community aspect of advocacy for change in the way that things are, which creates the issues at hand. Consider social justice issues related to clients and the profession. Consider social justice issues across three tiers. Self-awareness, awareness of one's own cultural values and biases. So we want to be highly aware of how we view the world and why we view them the way that we view it. Our client services, empowerment of disenfranchised clients. Are we making ourselves even accessible to people who may be disenfranchised, right? Are we promoting ourselves with barriers that sort of block a lot of people who may need our help? And then community collaboration, working towards social change at the organizational, institutional level. Yes, we could have maybe a private practice, or we could align ourselves with a hospital group or something. But in order to change things from a social standpoint, we may need to align ourselves with some nonprofit organizations, some advocacy groups, some governmental groups, some agencies, all of the above. And then working, let's see. Oh, nonprofit setting. So working in a nonprofit setting, not sure who all here works for a not-for-profit. But there can be some benefits and challenges to doing so, right? Usually challenges are, financial or whatever, but there's some benefits because you're able to help particular groups of people that would not otherwise be helped in any other way. So you want to match among clients, staffs, and therapists, right? You want to get the right people in there to be able to serve these communities. Marginalization and prejudice take a psychological and physical toll on individuals' well-being. You want to have an understanding of that. People being marginalized creates stress and anxiety on a daily basis, and over time that creates a lot of mental issues. And historically, social service to families have worked from a deficit model, which is services have focused on identifying problems of the child and parent, and then providing services to remediate those problems, right? That's been the historical approach. Maybe there's time for a new approach, right? One in which we are preemptive, right? We try to prevent, or I would say preventative. We try to prevent these problems at the beginning before they take hold. All right, when working systemically, be aware of how the family views you, right? So be aware of how you are being viewed by others is extremely important so that you're able to understand the dynamic of the entire relationship and the communication that you're having. Be aware of the stigma of mental health within the communities you work with clinically, and be aware of barriers to access to your services, and also be aware of cultural mistrust and suspicion. So you want to be able to pick up on these things and identify them so that there's no confusion on how you're going to be able to help individuals. All right, so some barriers: high interpersonal costs. Social justice initiatives may be incongruent with traditional counseling theories and ethical standards. That's a big one, and maybe I'll leave off with that. It may be incongruent with traditional counseling theories. So people say, hey, that's too complex. I don't want to implement all these new contexts and all these differences. I want to stick to the traditional way I've been taught. But obviously we know that that may not be the optimal way of helping people. And that's not get to the full sort of picture of why things are the way they are and how we're going to try to prevent things from happening in the future so that we have less people facing mental health issues. All right, I'm going to end off here. And I'm going to say goodbye to the class. So it's been my pleasure teaching you. You've all been excellent students. I hope that you've enjoyed the class. I hope that you learned a lot, and I hope you're able to apply some of the things that we taught in this class and learn and share with each other in your future practices and in your career. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, and until next time, email me anything that you need to address, and we'll go from there. But beyond that, good luck with everything in the future, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great night.
Thank you.
Hey, Madison.
Hi, Professor. How are you?
Good.
Good. So I just wanted to talk to you. I know we emailed about the questions. I did try to re-upload them and it didn't let me again. So I wanted to confirm if you wanted them by email or how that would best work for you.
Yeah, I mean, which was each chapter turned in? Was it any of them that you actually missed or no?
No, so when I initially started doing the writing questions, I wasn't turning them in the right place. I think I was putting them somewhere in the async. And then when I went back to try to put them in the assessments area, it was already closed and it wouldn't let me re-upload them. So I figured I would just maybe email it to you in a doc.
Okay, yeah, email me to the doc, and then I'll just give you all your points for each chapter. That'd be no problem.
Sure. And then I know I'm missing some other work in the class. It's been a really chaotic year so far for me of 2023. And on Sunday, my parents let me know that they're getting a divorce. So things are just a little bit chaotic right now, but I know that I'm missing work, and I just want to make sure to pass this class. I know that it's not going to be my best performance, but I just want to make sure not to fail.
For anything that you're missing,
Mhm.
give me a 1 or 2 page write-up about something relevant to what we discussed.
Okay.
And that'll suffice.
Okay.
And you'll get credit for that.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm sorry, I know it's not really like a documented emergency or something, but I just.
Yeah, I understand, part of this profession is, understanding real life, things happen. Honestly, sometimes people are just in bad mental spaces. And guess what? I've been there too, where I was like, a lot going on in my life, and I may not be as engaged in class, or what's going on, and I got too much going on, or I'm just not motivated, or I got too much on my plate, or too much happening. So I try to be very understanding,
I appreciate
that it's real life and things happen. But yeah, no worries. If you could get in, turn in something 1 or 2 pages for each assignment you're missing, and then get me that Word doc for the discussions, and you should be good to go.
For sure. Would it be all right if I got everything to you by Friday?
Yeah, that works. Yeah, I think I got a few days until I could get the grades in. So I think it may be like Monday or something like that. But yeah, try to get it into me by Friday.
Will do.
So I can get
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you so much,
Matt.
Professor Ross, and I really appreciate it. Your class has been wonderful this quarter. It's been an honor.
Yeah, it's been an honor too. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for everything.
Thanks so much. So talk to you
All right.
soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.